The glass door of Murphy's diner exploded open. A woman burst inside, soaking wet, barefoot, gasping for air. In her arms, a small boy pressed against her chest, both shaking violently. "My son hasn't eaten in 2 days," her voice cracked. "He found us before, in Cleveland. He always finds us." Outside, headlights appeared. A car door slammed. At booth 7, Thomas Barrett stared at the 2 silver spoons in front of him. One for him, one for his dead wife. Would you have pulled out the chair? But before we see what happens next, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. And drop a comment below. Where are you listening from right now? All right, let me tell you how Thomas Barrett ended up here. 6 months earlier, life in Cedar Falls, Ohio, looked completely different for Thomas Barrett. Thomas was 34, a high school history teacher with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled, which was often back then. Every morning he'd wake up to the sound of his wife Sarah humming in the kitchen, the smell of coffee mixing with whatever experimental breakfast she was trying that day. Emma would waddle in wearing mismatched pajamas, dragging her stuffed rabbit, and the 3 of them would squeeze into their tiny breakfast nook like it was the greatest place on earth, because it was. Sarah Barrett was the kind of woman who made everyone around her feel like they mattered. She worked as a pediatric nurse at Cedar Falls General, the kind who remembered every child's name, who stayed late without pay to read stories to the scared ones, who cried in the parking lot after losing a patient, but showed up the next day with an even bigger smile. Thomas had fallen in love with her in college, when she'd stopped to help an elderly man pick up groceries he'd dropped. That was Sarah, always seeing the people everyone else walked past. Their routine was sacred. Monday nights were family movie nights. Emma always fell asleep before the ending. Wednesday mornings, Sarah would bring Thomas coffee at school during his planning period, and they'd steal 15 minutes in his empty classroom, talking about everything and nothing. Friday evenings they'd go to Murphy's Diner, booth 7, always booth 7, where Emma would order chocolate chip pancakes for dinner, and Sarah would steal bites from Thomas's plate while pretending she wasn't hungry. Murphy's Diner had been their place since Thomas was a kid, a small, weathered establishment on the corner of Main and Oak, with cracked red vinyl booths, a checkerboard floor that had seen better decades, and the best apple pie in 3 counties. Old Murphy himself, now 72 with hands that shook from Parkinson's, still insisted on making the pies from his late wife's recipe. The diner was never crowded, just locals mostly, the kind of place where everyone knew your order before you sat down. Thomas's life was small, predictable, and absolutely perfect. He taught American history to teenagers who mostly didn't care, went home to a wife who made every day an adventure, and tucked in a daughter who thought he hung the moon. He had no ambitions to be anywhere else, do anything else, be anything more. Then came February 14th, Valentine's Day. Sarah had the night shift at the hospital. Thomas wanted her to call in sick, spend the evening together, but she'd laughed and kissed his forehead. "Mrs. Patterson's grandson is having surgery tomorrow," she'd said. "I promised I'd be there. He's only 7, Thomas. He's terrified." That was Sarah, always seeing the people everyone else walked past. She left at 6 p.m., blowing kisses to Emma, promising pancakes in the morning. At 11:47 p.m., Thomas's phone rang. Black ice on Route 32. Sarah's car had slid into the opposite lane. The semi-truck driver never had a chance to stop. The officer said she died instantly, said she didn't suffer. Thomas remembered nodding, thanking him, hanging up the phone, and then nothing, just nothing. The funeral was a blur. Hundreds of people came, former patients, their families, nurses from the hospital, students Thomas didn't recognize. Emma sat in his lap during the service, not crying, not speaking, just holding her rabbit and staring at the closed casket like she was trying to solve a puzzle. After the funeral, the casseroles came, the cards, the calls that Thomas never answered. The well-meaning neighbors who said things like, she's in a better place, and time heals all wounds, and other phrases that meant nothing when you woke up every morning reaching for someone who wasn't there. Thomas took a leave of absence from school. He told himself it was temporary, just until he got his head straight, just until he could stand in front of a classroom without feeling like the walls were closing in. Days blurred into weeks. Emma stopped sleeping through the night. She'd wake up screaming for her mommy, and Thomas would hold her and lie, saying everything was okay, knowing she could feel his heart breaking just as surely as hers was. The second spoon started 2 months after the funeral. Thomas had taken Emma to Murphy's Diner because she'd barely eaten in days, and she'd always loved their pancakes. They sat in booth 7, their booth, and the silence was deafening. Old Murphy brought out Emma's chocolate chip pancakes without being asked, and Thomas ordered coffee he wouldn't drink. Then Emma said, "Where's Mommy's spoon?" Thomas looked at the single spoon next to his coffee cup, at the empty space across from him where Sarah used to sit, stealing food off his plate, making Emma giggle. I don't know, sweetheart." Emma's face crumpled. "Mommy always had a spoon. She needs her spoon." Murphy, overhearing from behind the counter, slowly walked over. His shaking hands placed a spoon across from Thomas, right where Sarah used to sit. "Just in case," Murphy said softly. "Just in case." Emma stopped crying. She stared at that spoon like it was a lifeline, and every Friday after that they came back. Booth 7, 2 spoons, 1 for Thomas, 1 for the memory of Sarah. It became ritual, the only thing that made sense in a world that had stopped making sense. Emma would tell the empty seat about her week, about kindergarten, about her rabbit, about the picture she drew. Thomas would sit there, coffee going cold, looking at that spoon and remembering every laugh, every kiss, every stolen bite of food. People in Cedar Falls started to notice, started to whisper. Poor Thomas Barrett, lost his wife, can't let go, brings a spoon for a ghost. Thomas didn't care what they whispered. That spoon was all he had left. That and Emma. And he was terrified he was losing her too. Emma had stopped talking to other kids, stopped playing. Her kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called every week with concerns. Emma would sit alone at recess, whispering to her stuffed rabbit, watching the other children like they were from another planet. At night, Emma's nightmares got worse. She'd wake up crying, saying she couldn't remember Mommy's voice anymore, couldn't remember her smell, and Thomas would hold her and feel absolutely, completely helpless because he was forgetting too. Little things at first. The exact shade of Sarah's eyes in the sunlight, the way she said his name when she was annoyed, the sound of her laugh when something was truly funny, not just polite. He was losing her twice, once to death, once to time. By August, 6 months after Sarah's death, Thomas and Emma existed in a grey space between living and surviving. They went through motions. Emma went to kindergarten and came home. Thomas paid bills with money from Sarah's life insurance and felt sick every time. They ate dinner in silence. They slept in separate rooms, both of them alone with their nightmares. And every Friday, like clockwork, they went to Murphy's Diner. Booth 7, 2 spoons. It was all Thomas knew how to do anymore. Show up. Place the spoon. Remember, he didn't know that everything was about to change. That on a rainy Friday evening in late August, a stranger would walk through that door and shatter the careful, broken routine he'd built. That he'd have to choose between the memory he was clinging to and the possibility of something he'd thought was gone forever. He didn't know that grief had made him invisible to everyone, including himself. But someone was about to see him anyway. August 23rd. The evening started like every other Friday. Thomas picked Emma up from his mother's house at 5 p.m. His mother, Patricia, had been watching Emma more and more. She'd hug Emma goodbye, then pull Thomas aside with worried eyes. "Tommy, you can't keep doing this," she'd whispered that day. "The spoon thing. It's not healthy, for you or for Emma. Mom, please. She needs her father present, not a ghost mourning another ghost." Thomas had left without responding, because what could he say? That she was right? That he was failing his daughter? That every morning he woke up and had to remember all over again that Sarah was gone, and it felt like dying every single time. The drive to Murphy's Diner took 7 minutes. Emma sat in her booster seat, clutching her rabbit, staring out the window at nothing. "Emma, sweetheart, did you have fun at Grandma's today?" "Mm-hmm." "What did you do?" Silence. Emma? Coloured. That was it. That was all he got anymore. Single words. Grunts. The bright, chatty little girl who used to narrate every thought in her head had vanished along with her mother. Murphy's Diner appeared through the late summer haze, its flickering neon sign reading "Mu Fils d'R" because some letters had given up. Thomas parked in his usual spot, and they walked to the door, hand in hand, Emma's small fingers barely squeezing back. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. Just old Murphy behind the counter, polishing glasses with shaking hands, and a trucker named Dave in the corner booth working on his 3rd cup of coffee. "Booth 7? Murphy called out, already knowing. "Yeah." "Thanks, Murphy." They slid into the worn vinyl seats. Thomas pulled the spoon from his pocket. He'd started bringing one from home, the one Sarah always used, and placed it carefully across from him. Emma watched him do it, her expression unreadable. Murphy brought water and a kid's menu Emma wouldn't look at. "The usual?" "Yeah, chocolate chip pancakes for Emma, and I'll just have coffee." "Tommy, you need to eat—" "Just coffee, Murphy. Please." The old man sighed, but shuffled away without arguing. He'd learned months ago that arguing with grief was like arguing with the ocean. Thomas stared at Sarah's spoon, at the empty seat, at the ghost he couldn't let go of. Emma pulled out crayons and started drawing on her paper placemat. Thomas glanced at it. A house with a family, a tall figure, a small figure, and a 3rd figure floating above the house like an angel. Emma had drawn the same picture at least 50 times. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Emma didn't respond. Outside, the sky was darkening faster than it should. Storm clouds rolling in from the west, the kind that meant serious rain. Thomas watched them gather, thinking absently that they should probably eat quickly and get home before it hit. That's when he noticed her. Through the window, illuminated by the dying light and the diner's neon, a woman stood on the sidewalk, just standing there. She was young, maybe late 20s, with wet hair plastered to her face, even though it wasn't raining yet. She wore jeans that were soaked at the hems, and a thin jacket that wasn't enough for August in Ohio, let alone a storm. And pressed against her chest, mostly hidden in the jacket, was a small child. She wasn't looking at the diner. She was looking down the street, her head swiveling left and right like she was watching for something, or someone. Thomas frowned. Something about her posture, tense, coiled, afraid, made his teacher instincts kick in. The instincts he'd honed over years of spotting troubled kids in his classroom. She was running from something. Murphy brought Emma's pancakes and Thomas's coffee. "Storm's coming," he muttered. "Gonna be a big one." As if on cue, the first drops of rain started. Within seconds, it became a downpour. The kind of rain that turns the world into a watercolor painting, blurring everything. The woman outside was soaked in seconds, but she still didn't move, just stood there, holding that child, water streaming down her face. Thomas watched her, something uncomfortable twisting in his chest. It wasn't his business. She was probably waiting for a ride. Probably fine. But Sarah's voice echoed in his memory, always seeing the people everyone else walks past. Emma was eating her pancakes mechanically, one tiny bite at a time. Thomas looked at her, then back at the woman outside, then at the spoon sitting across from him. What would Sarah do? He knew the answer. Sarah would have already been out there. Sarah would have opened the door and invited her in without a second thought. But Sarah was dead, and Thomas was tired and broken, and he had Emma to think about. And the woman's head snapped to the left, looking at something down the street. Her face went white, pure terror. Then she bolted for the diner door. It crashed open, bell jangling violently. The woman stumbled inside, soaking wet, breathing hard. The child in her arms was a little boy, maybe 3 years old, also drenched. Both of them were shaking. Every eye in the diner turned to her. Murphy paused mid-pour. Dave the trucker looked up from his coffee. Thomas felt Emma press against his side, startled. The woman stood in the doorway, water pooling at her feet, eyes wild and desperate. She looked at Murphy, at Dave, at Thomas. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "My son's hungry. Can we stay a while?" There was something in her voice, not just desperation, fear. The kind of fear that chases you 300 miles, the kind that makes you stand in the rain outside a diner because you're not sure if going inside is more dangerous than staying out. Murphy's expression softened immediately. "Of course, honey. Take any seat you—" "We don't have money," she interrupted, her voice cracking. He hasn't eaten since yesterday morning, and I just need somewhere warm for a little while. We won't be trouble, I promise. Please." The little boy in her arms made a small sound, and Thomas's heart cracked a little more. Murphy was already moving, grabbing menus. "Don't you worry about money. Sit down. Booth 7 has room." Everyone turned to Thomas. He hadn't meant to speak. The words just came out. Emma looked up at him, eyes wide. The woman stared at him like he'd offered her the moon. Thomas heard himself continue. "You're both soaked. You can sit with us while you warm up. Murphy, can we get another plate of pancakes? And coffee?" "Already on it, Tommy." The woman didn't move for a long moment, just stared at Thomas with an expression he couldn't quite read. Disbelief, relief, fear, all mixed together. Then slowly, carefully, she walked to booth 7. Thomas slid over, making room. Emma pressed closer to him, watching the strangers with cautious eyes. The woman sat down across from them, where the empty spoon waited. She placed the little boy in the seat next to her, wrapping her wet jacket around him. The boy was tiny, with dark curls and huge brown eyes that looked too old for his face. They sat in awkward silence. Water dripped from the woman's hair onto the formica table. She kept glancing at the door, then the windows, then back at the door. "I'm Thomas," he said finally. "This is my daughter, Emma." The woman swallowed hard. "Claire, this is my son, Oliver." "Hi, Oliver," Thomas said gently. The boy didn't respond, just stared at Emma's pancakes like they were a mirage. Emma, surprising Thomas completely, pushed her plate toward the middle of the table. "You can have some," she said quietly. "They're good." Oliver looked at his mother. Claire's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. The little boy grabbed a pancake with both hands and ate like he was starving. Because he was. Murphy appeared with another plate, more pancakes and coffee for Claire. He set them down without comment, just gave Thomas a small nod that said, "Sarah would be proud." Thomas picked up his coffee. His eyes fell on the spoon across the table. Sarah's spoon, the one that had sat there untouched for 6 months. Claire's hand was right next to it. For the first time since Sarah died, someone living was sitting in her seat. Something in Thomas's chest loosened and tightened all at once. "Thank you," Claire whispered, cradling the coffee cup like it was precious. "You have no idea. Thank you." "It's just pancakes," Thomas said, but his voice came out rough. "It's not," Claire said, meeting his eyes. "It's not just pancakes." Outside, thunder rumbled. The storm was getting worse. And Thomas Barrett, who had spent 6 months existing in a carefully controlled bubble of grief, suddenly realized that his small act of kindness had just invited something into his life, something complicated, something that would change everything. He just didn't know how much yet. Oliver ate 4 pancakes before he finally slowed down. Emma watched him with curiosity, occasionally pushing more syrup his way. Claire drank her coffee in small, desperate sips, her eyes still flicking to the windows every few seconds. "So," Murphy said, appearing with a refill pot, "you folks passing through Cedar Falls?" Claire tensed. "Something like that." "Long trip?" "Long enough." Murphy caught the warning in her tone and backed off with a gentle smile. But Thomas noticed. He'd spent years reading students who didn't want to talk about their home lives. He recognized evasion when he saw it. Claire wasn't just passing through. She was running. The question was, from what? "Where's your car?" Thomas asked carefully. "I can give you a jump if the battery died." "No car," Claire said quickly, too quickly. We took the bus, got off at the wrong stop, just trying to find our way to—" She trailed off. "To where?" She didn't answer, just took another sip of coffee. Emma, oblivious to the tension, was now drawing on her placemat with Oliver watching. She'd given him a blue crayon, and he was gripping it like it might disappear. "You're good at drawing," Oliver said quietly, his first words. Emma glanced at him. "My mommy was better." "Where's your mommy?" Emma's face fell. "Heaven." Oliver looked at his mother, then back at Emma. "My daddy's gone too." "Heaven?" "I don't know." The two children stared at each other, recognizing something in each other that the adults couldn't quite touch. Shared loss, shared confusion. Claire's hand trembled on her coffee cup. Thomas wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand, but the fear in Claire's eyes stopped him. Whatever she was running from, she wasn't ready to talk about it. The storm outside intensified. Rain hammered the roof like bullets. Lightning flashed, illuminating the empty street beyond. "You have somewhere to stay tonight?" Thomas asked. Claire hesitated. "We'll figure something out. In this storm, with a 3-year-old, we'll be fine. There's a motel about 2 miles. I said we'll be fine." Her voice was sharp, defensive. Then she closed her eyes, took a breath. I'm sorry. You've been so kind, and I'm sorry." Thomas recognized that too, pride fighting against desperation, the need to appear strong when everything was falling apart. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I understand." Claire looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, saw the dark circles under his eyes, the wedding ring still on his finger, the way he kept glancing at the spoon next to her hand. "Your wife?" she asked softly. 6 months ago. Car accident." "I'm sorry." "Me too." They sat in shared silence. 2 broken people, 2 motherless children, a diner booth that had somehow become a lifeboat in the middle of separate storms. Emma yawned, leaning against Thomas's shoulder. It was past 7 p.m., past her bedtime. They'd normally be home by now. Emma in her pajamas, Thomas staring at the ceiling trying to sleep. "We should go," Thomas said, reaching for his wallet. Panic flashed across Claire's face. "Already? It's late. Emma needs to get to bed." "Right, of course. Thank you again for—" "Where will you go?" The question came out before Thomas could stop it. Claire's jaw tightened. "I told you. We'll figure it out. The storm's not going to let up for hours. The motel's too far to walk with Oliver. The shelter's closed on Friday nights." Thomas surprised himself with how much he knew about Cedar Falls resources. Sarah had volunteered there sometimes. "We've been through worse," Claire said, but her voice cracked on the last word. Thomas looked at Emma, at Oliver, at 2 kids who'd both lost too much already. What would Sarah do? He already knew, and it terrified him. "We have a guest room," Thomas heard himself say. "It's small. The bed's just a double, but it's warm and dry and—" "No." Claire stood up abruptly. "No, I can't. Thank you, but no." "Claire, you don't know us. You don't know anything about us. It's not safe." "Not safe for who? Me or you?" She froze. Thomas stood too, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm a high school teacher. I have an ID and references and a house that's been in my family for 20 years. My mother lives 10 minutes away. The police station is 5 blocks from my house. I'm not—" He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "Whatever you're afraid of, I'm not it." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "You can't know that." "You're right. I can't. But I know it's about to start thundering, and Oliver's exhausted, and you both need sleep, and I have a guest room that's been empty since my wife died, and maybe—" He paused, surprised by the lump in his throat. Maybe that room should have people in it again. Murphy watched from behind the counter, silent. Dave, the trucker, was openly staring now. Emma tugged on Thomas's sleeve. "Daddy, the little boy can sleep in my room. I have extra blankets." Thomas's heart cracked. When had Emma last cared about anyone outside their bubble of grief? Claire looked at Oliver, at Emma, at Thomas, at the storm outside. Just for tonight. Thomas said quietly. No questions, no pressure, just somewhere safe to sleep. Then tomorrow, if you want, I can drive you wherever you need to go. Why are you doing this? Claire whispered. Thomas looked at the spoon on the table, Sarah's spoon. Because someone I loved taught me that we're supposed to see the people everyone else walks past. More tears spilled down Claire's cheeks. She looked at the door, at the windows, at Thomas, weighing risks, calculating dangers, trying to decide which fear was worse, the one outside or the one that came with accepting help from a stranger. Finally, she nodded. Just barely. Just for tonight, she whispered. Just for tonight, Thomas agreed. He had no idea he was lying. That tonight would become tomorrow, would become next week, would become everything. He had no idea that bringing Claire and Oliver into his home would set off a chain of events that would endanger all of them. He just knew that for the first time in 6 months he'd done something Sarah would have done, and it felt like breathing after drowning. Murphy caught Thomas's eye and mouthed, "Be careful." Thomas nodded. He would be. He'd lock all the doors, keep his phone nearby, sleep with one ear open. What he didn't consider was that the danger wasn't coming from Claire. It was coming for her, and in 3 days it would find her. The drive to Thomas's house took 10 minutes in the storm. Claire sat in the passenger seat of his old Honda, Oliver asleep in Emma's booster seat, Emma dozing against the window. Nobody spoke. Just the sound of windshield wipers fighting a losing battle and thunder rumbling in the distance. Thomas lived on Maple Street, a quiet neighborhood with old oak trees and houses that had seen generations grow up. His house was a 2-story colonial, white with blue shutters, a porch swing Sarah had insisted on, and a lawn that was starting to look neglected. Inside, the house was clean but empty feeling, the kind of clean that comes from not really living, just existing. Dishes done, but no food cooking. Floors vacuumed, but no toys scattered. Everything in its place because nothing was being used. "Emma's room is upstairs," Thomas said, turning on lights. "The guest room is next to it. Bathrooms between them. Towels are in the closet." Claire stood in the foyer, dripping water on the hardwood, Oliver in her arms. She looked around like she was memorizing exits. Emma, more awake now, tugged on Oliver's wet sleeve. "Come see my room. I've stuffed animals." Oliver looked at his mother. Claire hesitated, then nodded. Emma led Oliver up the stairs, chattering quietly about her rabbit collection. Thomas and Claire stood in the entryway, suddenly alone, the weight of what he'd just done settling on Thomas's shoulders. He'd invited strangers into his home, into the space where Sarah's memory lived in every corner, where Emma slept, where they were supposed to be safe. "I should show you the guest room," Thomas said. Claire followed him upstairs. The guest room was small but comfortable. A double bed with a faded quilt, a dresser with a dusty lamp, a window overlooking the backyard. Thomas realized he hadn't been in this room since Sarah's parents visited last Christmas. "I'll find you some dry clothes," Thomas said. "Sarah's things are still, they'll fit. Probably. You don't have to. It's fine." He went to his bedroom, their bedroom, and opened the closet. Sarah's side was exactly as she'd left it. He'd been meaning to pack it up for months. Couldn't bring himself to do it. He grabbed sweatpants and a t-shirt, trying not to smell the fabric, trying not to remember. Back in the guest room, he handed them to Claire. "Bathroom's through there. Take your time." Claire took the clothes, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you for all of this. I can't." She stopped, overwhelmed. "It's okay." "It's not. You don't know what you're—" She cut herself off, shaking her head. "Just thank you." She disappeared into the bathroom. Thomas stood in the hallway wondering what he'd just done, wondering what Claire had been about to say. "You don't know what you're getting into," maybe. Or, "You don't know what I've brought to your door." In Emma's room, both kids were on her bed. Emma was showing Oliver her stuffed animals, naming each one. Oliver was listening with wide eyes, occasionally touching the soft fur like he'd never seen a toy before. "Emma," Thomas said gently, "it's late. Let's get you ready for bed." "Can Oliver sleep in here?" Please? He can have my extra pillow. Thomas looked at the two children, already bonding over shared loss and stuffed rabbits. Something in his chest ached. That's up to Oliver's mom. Claire emerged from the bathroom in Sarah's clothes, towel drying her hair. She looked younger now, less afraid. The warm clothes and dry environment had softened her edges. She was pretty, Thomas realized with a start. Mid-20s maybe. Dark hair, green eyes, a face that probably smiled easily when she wasn't terrified. Oliver can stay with me, Claire said quickly. Mommy, I want to stay with Emma, Oliver said, the first full sentence he'd spoken all night. She has a nightlight. And stories. Claire's face crumpled. Oliver, sweetheart, it's okay, Emma said seriously. My daddy reads good stories. He can read to both of us. Thomas found himself nodding. It's fine, really. You look exhausted. Get some sleep. I'll handle bedtime. Claire looked between her son and Thomas, clearly torn. Finally, exhaustion won. Okay, just tonight. Just tonight, Thomas echoed. 30 minutes later, both kids were in Emma's bed, clean and dry in borrowed pajamas, Emma's stuffed rabbit between them. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed with a book, Where the Wild Things Are, and read in the lamplight while Claire listened from the doorway. Oliver fell asleep before the wild rumpus started. Emma lasted until Max sailed back home. Thomas watched them sleep for a moment, these two broken children who'd found each other, and felt something he hadn't felt in 6 months. Purpose. He turned off the lamp and found Claire still in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry. It's just, he hasn't slept like that in so long. He's always scared, always listening for... She stopped. Thank you. They went downstairs. Thomas made tea because it was what Sarah used to do when people were upset. They sat at the kitchen table, mugs between them, the storm still raging outside. You don't have to tell me anything, Thomas said, but if you want to talk, I'm good at listening. Claire wrapped her hands around her mug. For a long time she didn't speak. Then, his father, Oliver's father, that's who I'm running from. Thomas waited. His name is Marcus. We were together for 5 years. He was... God, he was so good at first. Charming, attentive, made me feel like I was the only person in the world. She laughed bitterly. Classic, right? Then I got pregnant with Oliver, and things changed. Little things at first. Comments about what I wore, who I talked to, where I went. Then the first time he grabbed my arm too hard. Then the first time he pushed me. Then the first time he... She stopped, swallowing hard. I left him when Oliver was 6 months old. Got a restraining order. Moved 3 times. But he always found us. Always. He has connections, friends in the police, a good lawyer. Every time I ran, he'd find us within a month. And the courts, they kept giving him visitation, kept saying he deserved to see his son, even when I showed them the bruises, even when Oliver started having nightmares. Thomas's hands tightened on his mug. 2 weeks ago, Marcus told me he was filing for full custody, said I was an unfit mother, said he had evidence, and I couldn't let him take Oliver. I couldn't. So we ran. Really ran this time. Took only what we could carry. Left our apartment in Cleveland at 3 a.m. No car, no phone, just bus tickets and cash and... Her voice broke. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where we're going. I just know I can't let him find us. Claire, you should make us leave, she said, meeting his eyes. Right now. Because if Marcus finds us here, he won't just take Oliver. He'll destroy you too. He destroys everyone who helps me. My sister lost her job because of him. My best friend had her car vandalized. My mother had to move to Florida. Everyone who gets close to us gets hurt. So you should make us leave. Right now. Before... No, Claire blinked. What? No, Thomas repeated. I'm not making you leave in a storm with nowhere to go. We'll figure this out in the morning. Right now, you and Oliver need sleep. You need 1 night of not being afraid. You don't understand. You're right, I don't. But I understand that you're a mother protecting her child. And I understand that right now you're safe. So please, just for tonight, stop running." Claire stared at him, fresh tears spilling. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything." Thomas looked at his wedding ring, at the kitchen where Sarah used to dance while cooking, at the life he'd been barely surviving for 6 months. "Maybe I need to help someone," he said quietly. "Maybe that's how I start living again instead of just existing." They sat in silence, the storm outside gradually quieting to a steady rain. "Just tonight," Claire finally whispered. "Just tonight," Thomas agreed. But in the back of his mind, he was already thinking about tomorrow, about resources, about that lawyer Sarah had been friends with, about what helping actually meant. He was thinking about how Emma had smiled at Oliver, how she'd offered her pancakes without being asked, how for the first time since Sarah died, his daughter had seen someone outside her own pain. He was thinking that maybe letting people into his carefully controlled grief wasn't dangerous. Maybe it was necessary. What Thomas wasn't thinking about was Marcus. Wasn't thinking about what kind of man has connections in multiple police departments. Wasn't thinking about what it means when someone says, "He always finds us." But he would, soon. Because 300 miles away, in a Cleveland apartment, Marcus was looking at his phone, at credit card records, at bus station cameras, at traffic footage, and he was smiling. Because he'd found her again. He always did. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine. The storm washed away like it had never existed. Thomas woke to the sound of children laughing, an impossible sound in a house that had known only silence for 6 months. He found Emma and Oliver in the living room, building a fort out of couch cushions. Claire was in the kitchen making pancakes with the mix she'd found in the pantry, looking guilty. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I should have asked. I just thought maybe I could make breakfast as a thank you, and—" "It's fine," Thomas said, surprised by how much he meant it. "It's more than fine." They ate breakfast together, the 4 of them crowded around the kitchen table. Oliver told a knock-knock joke he probably didn't understand, and Emma giggled. Claire smiled, really smiled, and Thomas realized he couldn't remember the last time this house had held this much light. After breakfast, Thomas made a decision. "Stay," he said. Claire looked up from her coffee. "What?" "Stay. Not just tonight. Stay until we figure this out properly." "Thomas, I can't. You don't have anywhere to go. You have no car, no phone, probably not much money. Marcus is looking for you, so you need to stay off the grid, which means no shelters, no motels, nothing that requires ID." Thomas surprised himself with how much he'd thought this through. "Stay here. Take a few days. We'll figure out a real plan. I have a friend, Sarah had a friend, who's a family lawyer. We can at least talk to her." "That's insane. You don't know us. What if I'm lying? What if I'm the dangerous one?" "Are you?" "No, but then stay." Emma appeared in the doorway. "Are you leaving?" she asked Oliver. Oliver looked at his mother, his face falling. "Are we, Mommy?" Claire looked at her son, at Emma, at Thomas, at the first safe place they'd had in 2 weeks. "Just a few days," she said finally, "until we figure out next steps." "A few days," Thomas agreed. That was Saturday. By Sunday, a few days had shifted. Claire helped with laundry. Oliver and Emma played in the backyard. Thomas called Sarah's friend Jennifer, the family lawyer, who agreed to meet Monday morning. No charge, just because Sarah would have wanted her to help. By Monday, Thomas started seeing the cracks in Claire's story. Not lies exactly, but omissions. The way she'd freeze when a car drove past the house. The way she'd check the locks 3 times before bed. The way she'd positioned herself in every room so she could see both the door and the windows. "There's more to this, isn't there?" Thomas asked Monday night after the kids were asleep. They were sitting on the porch swing, Sarah's swing, in the warm August darkness. Claire was quiet for so long, Thomas thought she wouldn't answer. "Marcus has money," she finally said. "A lot of it. Family money. And he uses it to make problems disappear. He has a PI who finds me every time, and he has friends in law enforcement who look the other way when they should be helping. I'm not just running from an angry ex. I'm running from someone who has the resources to make me look crazy and take Oliver legally." That's why you didn't go to the police here. Police can't help. They never have. Thomas thought about that. About power. About systems that fail the people they're supposed to protect. He'd seen it in education. Kids who fell through cracks because their parents didn't know how to navigate bureaucracy or didn't have money for lawyers. Jennifer will help, he said. We'll figure this out. Claire looked at him in the porch light. Why are you doing this? It was the third time she'd asked. Thomas still didn't have a good answer. Because you need help. Because Oliver and Emma are friends. Because my house has been empty for 6 months, and having you here makes it feel less like a tomb. He paused. Because maybe I'm tired of just remembering my wife instead of honoring her. How do you honor her? By being the kind of person she thought I was. They sat in comfortable silence, the swing creaking. Neither of them noticed the car parked 3 houses down, the man inside with a camera, the photos being sent to a phone 300 miles away. Neither of them saw Marcus smile when he received those photos. When he saw Claire sitting on a porch swing with a strange man, laughing, looking comfortable, looking like she'd moved on. That was Monday. Tuesday, Thomas went back to work. He'd been on leave for months, but his principal had called asking if he was ready. Thomas said yes. Maybe having a routine would help. Maybe getting back to normal was possible. At school, he threw himself into preparing for the fall semester, made lesson plans, organized his classroom, avoided the sympathetic looks from other teachers. At lunch, he called home to check on Claire and the kids. Everything was fine. They'd gone to the park. Oliver loved the swings. Emma was teaching him to pump his legs. At 2 p.m., Thomas's principal called him into the office. Tom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Thomas's stomach dropped. Okay. Does the name Claire Mitchell mean anything to you? Everything stopped. Why? Thomas asked carefully. Because I got a very strange call this morning from a man who says he's her ex-partner, says she's unstable, says she kidnapped their son, says she's wanted in Ohio on parental abduction charges. Principal Morrison looked at him seriously. Tom, is this woman staying in your house? Thomas's mind raced. What exactly did this man say? That Claire is mentally ill, that she has a history of making false accusations, that she took their son 2 weeks ago in violation of a custody agreement, that he's been looking for them and got a tip that she might be in Cedar Falls. Morrison leaned forward. Tom, he sounded legitimate. He sounded like a worried father. Is there something I should know? Thomas thought about Claire's fear, her stories, the bruises she'd hinted at. He's lying, Thomas said. How do you know? Because I've met her, because I've seen how afraid she is, because Oliver is 3 years old and flinches when a door closes too hard. Or maybe that's because Claire is abusive. She's not. Tom, I'm not saying she is. I'm saying I don't know, and neither do you. You've known her for 3 days. Morrison softened. I know you're grieving. I know you're trying to help, but you need to be careful, for Emma's sake, if nothing else. Thomas left school early, mind spinning. He drove home thinking about Marcus, about how easily a man with money could make phone calls, plant doubts, turn people against Claire before she even had a chance to defend herself. He walked into his house at 3 p.m. and found Claire in the kitchen, pale, staring at her phone, the burner phone she'd bought at a gas station. What's wrong? Thomas asked. My mother called. I don't know how she got this number. Marcus called her, told her he knows where I am, told her. Claire's voice shook. He said he's coming for Oliver, that he'll be here by end of week, that he has a lawyer and court documents and... She looked at Thomas. He knows I'm here, in your house. He described your porch. Thomas felt cold. How? He has a PI. I told you. He always finds us. Then we go to the police. The police can't help. Claire was crying now. Don't you understand? He has custody documents, legal papers. The courts keep siding with him because he has money and lawyers, and I'm just the crazy ex who keeps making accusations she can't prove. If he shows up here with police, they'll take Oliver. They'll give him to Marcus, and I'll never see my son again. We'll call Jennifer. There's no time. He said end of week. That's 3 days. Jennifer can't do anything in 3 days. Oliver appeared in the doorway, sensing his mother's distress. "Mommy?" Claire immediately wiped her face, forcing a smile. "It's okay, baby. Everything's okay." But it wasn't. And Thomas could see in her eyes what she was thinking. She was going to run again. "Don't," Thomas said quietly. "Please don't run." "I have to." "Where will you go? How far will you get with no car and no money? He'll find you again. He always does. So please, stay. Let us help. Let us find a real solution." "There is no solution." Claire's voice cracked. "Don't you get it? Men like Marcus don't lose. They just don't. I've been running for 3 years, and he always wins. Always. The only question is how much damage he does before he takes Oliver, and I won't let him damage you and Emma too." That night, the house was tense. Emma sensed something was wrong and clung to Thomas. Oliver wouldn't leave Claire's side. They ate dinner in silence. At bedtime, Thomas read to the kids while Claire packed their few belongings in the guest room. He could hear her moving around, preparing to run. Again, after the kids fell asleep, Thomas found her sitting on the guest bed, crying quietly, a backpack at her feet. "Stay," he said again. "I can't." "Then let me come with you." Claire looked up, shocked. "What?" Thomas was shocked too. He hadn't meant to say that, but now that he had, he realized he meant it. "Let me help. I have a car, money. I can drive you somewhere safe, help you get settled. You don't have to do this alone. Thomas, you have Emma. You have a job, a life. You can't just—" "My life has been on hold for 6 months. Emma's been disappearing into grief right in front of me, and for the first time since Sarah died, she's smiling again. Because of Oliver. Because of you." He sat down next to her. "Maybe I can't save you from Marcus, but I can make sure you're not alone when you run. That has to count for something." Claire stared at him. "You're insane." "Probably. You'd risk everything. For strangers. You're not strangers anymore." They sat in silence. Then Claire made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Okay. We leave tomorrow night. After dark. I know a place in Pennsylvania. A women's shelter that doesn't ask questions. We can go there." Thomas nodded, his heart pounding. What was he doing? He was a high school teacher from Ohio. He didn't run from the law. He didn't help people flee across state lines. But he thought about Sarah, about what she would do. She'd help, without question, without hesitation. So he would too. They made plans. Thomas would tell his mother he was taking Emma on a spontaneous trip. He'd withdraw cash. They'd leave Wednesday night, drive through the night, arrive in Pennsylvania by Thursday morning. It wasn't a great plan, but it was a plan. Wednesday morning, Thomas went to work, taught his classes, withdrew money from the ATM, called his mother and lied about a trip. He came home at 3 p.m. to find 2 police cars in his driveway. His blood ran cold. He ran into the house and found Claire in handcuffs, crying. A female officer stood with Emma and Oliver in the living room. A male officer was searching the kitchen. "What's going on?" Thomas demanded. "Are you Thomas Barrett?" the male officer asked. "Yes." "What's happening?" "We have a warrant for Claire Mitchell's arrest. Parental abduction, violation of custody agreement. We're taking her into custody and releasing the minor child to his legal guardian. She didn't kidnap anyone." "Sir, please step aside." Claire's eyes met Thomas's, full of terror and resignation. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." They took her, right out of his house. Oliver was screaming for his mommy. Emma was crying, and Thomas was frozen, helpless, watching everything fall apart. A social worker arrived, explained that Oliver would be placed in temporary foster care until his father arrived from Cleveland, that it was standard procedure, that it was for the best. "His father is dangerous," Thomas said desperately. "That's not what the court documents say, sir." They took Oliver too, crying, reaching for Emma, calling for his mother. Emma collapsed in Thomas's arms, sobbing, and Thomas stood in his empty house, empty again, just like before, and felt something inside him break all over again. But this time, it didn't break into grief. It broke into rage, because this was wrong. All of this was wrong, and he wasn't going to let Marcus win. Not without a fight. Thomas Barrett had never broken the law in his life. He'd never even had a speeding ticket. But Wednesday night at 11 p.m. he broke into the Cedar Falls police station. Not literally. He walked in the front door, but what he did next was definitely illegal. "Can I help you?" the night desk officer asked. "I need to see Claire Mitchell, the woman you arrested this afternoon." "Are you a lawyer?" "I'm a friend." "Then no, she's being held pending transfer to Ohio authorities. No visitors except legal counsel." Thomas expected that, which is why he'd spent the last 3 hours calling every person Sarah had ever helped, every parent of every sick child she'd comforted, every nurse she'd worked with, every person who owed her a debt of kindness. One of them was Margaret Chen, a social worker who happened to be married to a public defender. Margaret's husband, David, arrived at the station at 11:30 p.m., looking annoyed but determined. "I'm here to see my client, Claire Mitchell," David announced. The desk officer frowned. "She hasn't requested counsel." "She has now. I was just informed of her situation. I'm representing her pro bono." They couldn't say no. David went back to see Claire. Thomas waited, leg bouncing, praying this would work. 30 minutes later, David emerged. "She's agreed to let me represent her, and she told me everything." David looked at Thomas seriously. "This is worse than you know." "How bad?" "Marcus Jennings isn't just abusive. He's connected. His father is a former Ohio state senator. His uncle is a federal judge, and he's used those connections to manipulate every court proceeding. The custody agreement Claire supposedly violated, it was signed under duress. The evidence of her being unstable, fabricated by a psychologist, Marcus paid off. This whole thing is a house of cards, but it's a house of cards built by someone who knows how to game the system. Can you fight it?" "Not in time. He'll have her extradited by tomorrow afternoon. And once she's back in Ohio, in his jurisdiction with his judges and his lawyers, she's done." Thomas felt his hope crumbling. "So what do we do?" David smiled. Not a happy smile, a dangerous one. "We don't fight in Ohio. We fight here." Over the next 8 hours, David Chen did something brilliant, something risky, something that could get him disbarred if it went wrong. He filed an emergency motion in Cedar Falls Court, local jurisdiction, claiming that Claire was a victim of domestic violence and that the Ohio custody agreement was obtained fraudulently. He requested an emergency hearing, citing immediate danger to a minor child. Most judges would have laughed it out of court, but Cedar Falls had a judge who'd been presiding for 30 years and had seen everything. Judge Patricia Reeves, known for not suffering fools, known for protecting kids above all else. She agreed to hear the case. Thursday morning, 9 a.m., 6 hours away. Thomas spent those 6 hours doing something he never thought he'd do. He gathered evidence. He called Claire's mother in Florida, who told him about the times Marcus had showed up drunk, threatening. He tracked down Claire's old neighbor in Cleveland, who'd heard the fights through the walls, who'd seen Claire with bruises. He found hospital records. Claire had been treated for a broken wrist 2 years ago. The report said she fell, but the x-rays showed the kind of break consistent with someone grabbing and twisting. By 8 a.m. Thursday, David had a file 3 inches thick. Marcus arrived at 8:30 a.m. Thomas saw him in the courthouse hallway and immediately understood everything. Marcus was handsome in an angular way, expensive suit, perfect smile. The kind of man who'd never heard no in his life, the kind who thought charm and money could solve anything. He saw Thomas and approached with that smile. "You must be the Good Samaritan," Marcus said, extending his hand. "Thank you for taking care of my son. I'm sorry Claire involved you in her episode." Thomas didn't take his hand. "Episode? She's unwell, has been for years. But I'm here now and I'll make sure Oliver gets the help he needs." Help? Stability, proper care, not running across state lines with a mother who can't manage her own mental health. Thomas looked at this man, this well-dressed, well-spoken man, this man who would sound completely reasonable to anyone who didn't know better. "I've seen how Oliver acts around Claire." Thomas said quietly. "I've seen how much he loves her, how safe he feels with her." "Children often love their abusers," Marcus said, still smiling. "It's called trauma bonding, but I appreciate your concern. I really do. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a son to collect." He walked away, confident, assured. Thomas wanted to punch him, wanted to scream. But instead, he walked into courtroom 3 and sat in the gallery. The hearing started at 9 a.m. sharp. Judge Reeves was 65, grey-haired, with eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Marcus's lawyer present the custody agreement. The documentation of Claire's mental instability, the parental abduction charges. It was compelling, professionally presented, completely convincing. Then David stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that the custody agreement in question was obtained through fraud, coercion, and manipulation of the Ohio court system." Marcus's lawyer objected. "Your Honor, this is a simple custody matter. The agreement is valid." "I'll allow it," Judge Reeves said. "Mr. Chen, you have 1 hour." David didn't need an hour. He presented the hospital records, Claire's neighbor's testimony via phone, Claire's mother's statement. The psychologist's report that showed the doctor who'd evaluated Claire had a financial relationship with Marcus's family. Then David did something brilliant. He called Thomas to the stand. Thomas had never testified before. His hands shook as he swore to tell the truth. "Mr. Barrett," David said gently, "how did you meet Claire Mitchell?" Thomas told the story, the diner, the rain, the hungry child, the fear in Claire's eyes that was too real to be manipulation. "And in the 4 days Claire and Oliver stayed in your home, did you see any evidence that Claire was unstable or a danger to her child?" "No. I saw a mother who was terrified but trying to stay strong for her son. I saw a child who felt safe with her. I saw—" Thomas's voice cracked. "I saw what love looks like when it's fighting to survive." Marcus's lawyer tried to poke holes, asked about Thomas's judgment, his grief, whether he was really qualified to assess Claire's mental state after knowing her 4 days. "I'm a teacher," Thomas said. "I've been working with kids for 10 years. I know what trauma looks like. I know what fear looks like. And I know the difference between a child who's afraid of their parent and a child who's afraid for their parent. Oliver was afraid for Claire because he knew what was coming." Then David called Claire. She'd been brought from holding, still in the same clothes from her arrest. She looked exhausted, terrified, but when she started talking, her voice was steady. She told everything, the years of abuse, the escalation, the times she'd left, and Marcus found her. The court proceedings where his lawyers made her sound crazy, the psychologist who'd spent 30 minutes with her and written a 10-page report about her mental instability. The custody agreement she'd signed because Marcus threatened to take Oliver completely if she didn't. "I'm not unstable," Claire said, looking directly at Judge Reeves. "I'm scared. There's a difference. I'm a mother trying to protect her child from a man who hurts people and gets away with it because he has money and connections. That's not mental illness. That's survival." Marcus's lawyer tried to discredit her, but something had shifted in the courtroom. Judge Reeves was watching Marcus now, not Claire, watching how he whispered to his lawyer, how he smiled that charming smile, how he performed concern. Finally, Judge Reeves called Oliver in. The little boy was brought in by the social worker. He saw his mother and ran to her, crying. Claire held him, whispering that it was okay, everything was okay. Judge Reeves came down from her bench, highly unusual, and knelt in front of Oliver. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Judge Reeves. Can you answer some questions for me?" Oliver nodded, clutching his mother. "Do you want to live with your mommy?" "Yes." "Are you scared of your mommy?" "No." "Do you feel safe with your mommy?" "Yes." "What about your daddy?" "Do you feel safe with your daddy?" Oliver's face changed. He pressed closer to Claire. Judge Reeves looked at Marcus, then at Oliver, then at the file in front of her. She stood up and returned to her bench. "Here's what I see," she said. "I see a custody agreement from Ohio that may or may not be valid. I see allegations of mental instability that appear questionable at best. I see a father with significant resources and a mother with none. And I see a 3-year-old child who is clearly afraid of his father and safe with his mother. Marcus's lawyer stood. Your Honor, with all due respect, you don't have jurisdiction to... I have emergency jurisdiction under the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Act when a child is at risk of imminent harm, and I'm exercising it. Judge Reeves looked at Marcus. Mr. Jennings, I'm placing a temporary restraining order barring you from contact with Oliver Mitchell, pending a full investigation into the circumstances of the Ohio custody agreement. I'm ordering that Claire Mitchell be released immediately. And I'm referring this entire matter to the Ohio Attorney General's office for investigation into possible judicial fraud and witness tampering. The courtroom erupted. Marcus was on his feet, red-faced. His lawyer was objecting. David was trying not to smile. Your Honor, this is outrageous, Marcus shouted. You can't. I just did. And Mr. Jennings, if you violate my restraining order, I'll hold you in contempt, and you'll spend the night in my jail. Are we clear? Marcus stared at her, his charming mask completely gone. What remained was rage, pure, entitled rage. This isn't over, he said quietly. You're right, Judge Reeves said. It's not, because I'm also contacting every judge who presided over your previous custody hearings, and I suspect they're going to be very interested in what I found today. Now get out of my courtroom. Marcus left, his lawyer scrambling after him. Claire collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Oliver climbed into her lap. Thomas sat in the gallery, shaking, unable to believe what had just happened. They'd won, against all odds, against money and connections and a system built to protect men like Marcus. They'd won. Outside the courthouse, Claire held Oliver and cried into his hair. David packed up his briefcase, exhausted but satisfied. Thomas stood on the steps, feeling the morning sun, feeling like he could finally breathe. Claire approached him, Oliver on her hip. You did this, she said. You saved us. David did this. You started it, in the diner, when you pulled out that chair. She was crying again. Why? Why did you help us? Thomas looked at this woman he'd known for less than a week. This stranger who'd walked into his life during a storm and reminded him what it felt like to be human. Because someone I loved taught me to see the people everyone else walks past, he said, and I'm trying to be the person she thought I was. Claire hugged him, careful not to crush Oliver between them. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing us. Emma came running from where Thomas's mother had been watching her, throwing herself at Oliver. The two kids hugged, laughing. And Thomas Barrett, who'd spent 6 months living in the past, suddenly saw a future that looked nothing like what he'd planned. But maybe that was okay. Maybe that was better. 3 months later, Cedar Falls welcomed October with gold and red leaves and air that smelled like apples and cinnamon. Thomas Barrett sat on his porch swing, Sarah's swing, watching Emma and Oliver play in the yard. They were building a leaf pile, shrieking with laughter every time one of them jumped in. The front door opened, and Claire emerged with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Thomas and sat next to him, close enough that their shoulders touched. They're going to track leaves all through the house, she said, smiling. Probably, Thomas agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play. It had become their routine. Morning coffee on the swing, evenings cooking dinner together, bedtime stories with both kids in Emma's room. Claire and Oliver were still in the guest room. It had been 3 months, and they were still calling it temporary, still pretending this arrangement had an expiration date. But both of them knew better. After the hearing, Claire had nowhere to go. Ohio was investigating Marcus, but the process was slow. David had helped Claire file new custody paperwork, but courts moved at glacial speed. In the meantime, Judge Reeves had extended her protective order, essentially trapping Marcus in Ohio, while Claire built a new life in Cedar Falls. So she stayed, in the guest room, helping with Emma, cooking meals, finding work at a local bakery, building something that looked suspiciously like a life. And somewhere along the way, Between shared dinners and bedtime routines and quiet conversations on this porch swing, something shifted. Thomas couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe it was the first time Claire laughed at one of his terrible history jokes. Maybe it was the night Emma had a nightmare and Claire helped him calm her down. Maybe it was the morning he found Claire wearing Sarah's old bathrobe, making pancakes, looking so natural in his kitchen that his heart ached. Maybe it was all of it, slowly, gradually, until one day he looked at her and realized she wasn't just a guest anymore. "Thomas," Claire said now, pulling him from his thoughts. "We need to talk." His stomach dropped. Those 4 words. Never good. "Okay." Claire set down her coffee mug. "David called yesterday. The Ohio investigation is done. Marcus is facing charges, fraud, perjury, witness tampering. His father's connections couldn't save him this time. The custody agreement was officially voided, and I have full legal custody of Oliver." That's amazing. "Claire, that's everything you wanted." "Yeah, it is." She was quiet. "Which means I don't have to hide anymore. I can go anywhere, do anything. I'm free." Thomas's chest tightened. "Right. Of course. You must be relieved." "I am. Claire looked at him. "I need to know something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. These 3 months, us being here, have we just been another project? Another way for you to avoid grieving Sarah?" Thomas blinked, stung. "What? No, Claire, because I need to know, before I—" She stopped, took a breath. "Thomas, I care about you. A lot. More than I should, more than is probably smart after everything. But I can't stay here if we're just playing house. If this is just you avoiding your real life, I need to know if this is real." Thomas looked at her green eyes and uncertain expression, at this woman who'd walked into his life during a storm and somehow made the sun come out. "When Sarah died," he said slowly, "I thought I died too. I thought the best parts of me were buried with her, and maybe they were. But these last 3 months, I've found new parts. Different parts. You didn't replace Sarah. Nobody could. But you reminded me that I'm still alive, that Emma's still alive, that we can be happy again without betraying Sarah's memory. Thomas, I love you." The words came out rushed, desperate. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe in the diner. Maybe when you made pancakes that first morning. Maybe every day since. But I love you. And not because you're a project or a distraction. Because you're you. You're strong and brave and an amazing mother, and you make terrible coffee, but you sing while you cook, and you remember to pack extra snacks for Emma and—" Claire kissed him. It was soft and tentative, and tasted like coffee and possibility. Thomas froze for a heartbeat, then kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her face. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying. "I love you too," Claire whispered. "I was so afraid to say it, afraid I was imposing, afraid you didn't feel the same." "Afraid? Stop being afraid," Thomas said. "We've both been afraid long enough." Emma's voice carried from the yard. "Are you kissing? Oliver, they're kissing." Oliver's response, "Gross!" Both kids dissolved into giggles. Claire laughed, wiping her eyes. "So what now?" Thomas looked at her, at his daughter playing with her son, at the house where Sarah's memory lived alongside new memories, at the future that was nothing like what he'd planned and somehow better for it. "Now you stop sleeping in the guest room," he said. "Now we stop calling this temporary. Now we build something real. Together." Claire's smile was brighter than the October sun. Yeah. She kissed him again, longer this time. And Thomas Barrett, who'd spent 6 months learning how to survive loss, finally remembered how to embrace love. It wasn't a betrayal of Sarah. It was honoring her, because Sarah had always believed that broken things could be beautiful, that second chances were sacred, that love wasn't finite. It was infinite, growing and changing and finding new shapes. Sarah had taught him to see the people everyone else walked past, and Claire had taught him to see himself again. "Hey," Claire said, pulling back, "what about Sarah's spoon at the diner?" Thomas had been thinking about that. I think we keep bringing it. But maybe it's not just for remembering anymore. Maybe it's for celebrating. Celebrating that Sarah existed, that she made me who I am, that her love was big enough to make room for this. Claire nodded, fresh tears spilling. I like that. That Friday, they went to Murphy's diner. All four of them. Booth 7. Murphy brought out chocolate chip pancakes without being asked. And when Thomas placed Sarah's spoon on the table, Murphy smiled. She'd be happy for you, Tommy, the old man said quietly. She always wanted you to be happy. Thomas believed him. They ate pancakes and laughed, and Emma and Oliver argued over who got the last piece, and Claire stole food from Thomas's plate, and for the first time in 6 months, Booth 7 was filled with life again. The spoon sat there, polished and perfect, not a symbol of what was lost, a symbol of what was carried forward. That night, Thomas showed Claire the box of Sarah's things he'd been meaning to pack for months. Photos, letters, her favorite sweater. I want Emma to have these, he said. When she's older, I don't want her to forget her mother. She won't, Claire promised. We'll make sure of it. We'll tell her stories, show her pictures, keep Sarah alive in all the ways that matter. You don't mind? Claire took his hand. Sarah made you. She's part of who you are. That means she's part of us, all of us. I'm honored to help keep her memory alive. Thomas pulled her close, overwhelmed by gratitude and love, and the strange beauty of grief transforming into joy. Later, after the kids were asleep, Thomas and Claire lay in bed, his bed, not the guest room, talking about the future. I was thinking, Claire said, maybe I could go back to school, finish my degree. I always wanted to be a teacher. Yeah? Yeah. Maybe I could work at the high school. We could carpool. She smiled. Is that too domestic? Too boring? It's perfect, Thomas said. Boring is good. Boring is safe. We've both had enough chaos. What about Emma? How do you think she'll handle us? I think she already has. She asked me yesterday if Oliver was going to be her brother now. What did you say? I said maybe, if that was okay with her. And she said she'd have to think about it. Then she came back 5 minutes later and said yes, but only if Oliver lets her be the boss. Claire laughed, the sound filling the dark room with light. They fell asleep, tangled together, the future uncertain but no longer frightening, because broken things could be beautiful, and second chances were sacred. And love, Thomas learned, wasn't about replacing what was lost. It was about making room for what came next. 1 year after that rainy night at Murphy's diner, Thomas Barrett stood in front of his American history class, teaching about the civil rights movement with the kind of passion he'd thought he'd lost forever. He'd returned to work full-time after that summer, thrown himself back into teaching, and discovered that he was good at it again. Better even. Because he'd learned something about resilience, about fighting systems that were broken, about how one person standing up could change everything. His students loved him, especially the ones who were struggling, the ones everyone else walked past. Thomas saw them now, really saw them. At home, life was beautifully chaotic. Emma was in first grade, reading at a third grade level, bossing Oliver around with sisterly authority. Claire had enrolled in community college, studying education. Oliver called him Thomas most of the time, but occasionally slipped and said Dad, then looked embarrassed. Thomas never corrected him. They'd gotten married in June. Small ceremony in Murphy's diner, booth 7, officiated by Judge Reeves. Emma and Oliver were the entire wedding party. Murphy made the cake, apple naturally. Thomas still wore Sarah's wedding ring on a chain around his neck. Claire understood. She'd never asked him to remove it. Every Friday they still brought Sarah's spoon to the diner, and every Friday Thomas told the kids one story about Sarah, about her laugh, her kindness, her terrible cooking experiments. Sarah was part of their family, past and present woven together. Thomas had learned that grief doesn't end. It just changes, makes room, becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. He was happy, genuinely, surprisingly happy. The kind of happiness that comes after surviving something impossible. And sometimes, on quiet evenings on the porch swing, he could swear he felt Sarah there, smiling, approving, telling him he'd done exactly what she hoped he would. He'd become the person she thought he was. Claire never thought she'd feel safe again. For 3 years she'd lived looking over her shoulder, waiting for Marcus to appear, waiting for the next time everything fell apart. But standing in her kitchen in Cedar Falls, her kitchen now, not a guest in someone else's house, making breakfast for her family, she finally exhaled. Marcus was in prison. 18 months for fraud and perjury, with more charges pending. His father's political career was over. His uncle had recused himself from the federal bench. The House of Cards had collapsed spectacularly. Claire had full custody of Oliver, with Marcus's parental rights terminated. He'd never hurt them again. She'd finished her associate's degree and was working toward her bachelor's in education. She volunteered at the women's shelter where she'd planned to hide that night a year ago. She told her story to other women running from their own monsters, told them it was possible to escape, to survive, to thrive. She'd married Thomas knowing that she'd never fully have him. Part of him would always belong to Sarah, and she was okay with that. Because Sarah was the reason Thomas knew how to love someone broken. Sarah was the reason he'd pulled out that chair. Claire visited Sarah's grave sometimes, brought flowers, told her about Emma and Oliver, thanked her for raising a man who saw people everyone else walked past. She'd made friends in Cedar Falls, real friends, her bakery co-workers, other parents at Emma's school, people who knew her story and didn't judge. For the first time since she was 21 years old, Claire had a life. Not just survival, a life. She was studying to be a teacher because she wanted to be someone like Thomas, someone who saw the struggling kids, who made them feel seen. Oliver was thriving. No more nightmares, no more flinching. Just a normal 4-year-old who loved dinosaurs and his big sister Emma and jumping in leaf piles. Sometimes Claire still woke up afraid, expecting to find Marcus standing over her bed. But then she'd remember where she was, who she was with, that she was safe. And she'd go back to sleep. Emma was 7 years old when she wrote an essay for school titled "The Day It Stopped Raining." It was about the night she met Oliver, about how her daddy had been sad for a long time, and she'd been sad too, and everything felt grey. But then a little boy who was also sad came to dinner, and suddenly there was someone who understood. She wrote about how Oliver became her brother, how Claire became her stepmom, but she still had a real mom in heaven, and that was okay. How her family got bigger in a way she didn't expect. She wrote, "My teacher says family is who loves you. So I have 2 moms, one in heaven and one at home. And I'm lucky because both of them love me very much." Her teacher cried reading it. Emma kept her mother's things in a special box in her room. Photos, Sarah's stethoscope from the hospital, a scarf that still smelled like her perfume. Claire had helped her make a memory book filled with stories about Sarah. Emma talked to her mum sometimes, at night when she couldn't sleep, told her about school and Oliver and how Daddy was smiling again. She imagined her mum was happy about that. Emma loved Claire, not the same way she loved her mum, different, but just as real. Claire braided her hair and helped with homework and made terrible coffee that made Daddy laugh. Oliver was annoying sometimes. He always wanted to play with her stuff, but mostly he was fun. She liked having a little brother, liked being the boss. Emma still remembered what it felt like when her mom died, the grey, empty feeling, the way Daddy stopped seeing her. But that was before. Now was different. Now was colourful, loud, full. She was happy, finally. Oliver didn't remember much about the bad times. He was only 4, and his brain protected him by making the scary parts fuzzy. He remembered being hungry a lot, remembered his mom being scared, remembered a man with an angry voice, but mostly he remembered the rain. Standing outside the diner, wet and cold, his mom holding him so tight he could hear her heart beating fast. Then warm, lights, a girl with crayons, a man with kind eyes who didn't yell. That was Thomas, his dad. He wasn't sure what to call him. Thomas said he could call him whatever felt right. So sometimes it was Thomas, sometimes it was Dad. Depended on the day. Oliver loved his life now. He loved his room. He had his own room. Loved his toys. He'd never had so many toys. Loved his school. Loved his big sister Emma, even when she was bossy. Loved his mom's smile, the real one, the one that meant she wasn't scared anymore. He didn't remember his old dad much, and when he tried, Thomas said that was okay. Said Oliver didn't have to remember things that hurt. Oliver wanted to be like Thomas when he grew up, a teacher, someone who helped people. But first, he was going to be a dinosaur, because 4-year-olds could be dinosaurs if they wanted. Life was good, life was safe, life was full of pancakes and bedtime stories and leaf piles. Life was everything his mom had been running toward. Murphy retired 6 months after that rainy night, sold the diner to a young couple from Columbus who promised to keep the recipes, especially the apple pie. He was 73, and his hands shook too much to make pie anymore. Time to rest, but he still came by every Friday, still sat in the corner booth with free coffee, still watched Thomas and Claire and the kids in booth 7. Some nights, when the diner was quiet, he could swear he saw a woman sitting at that table, long brown hair, kind smile, looking at her family with pride. Murphy didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in love, and love, he'd learned, never really left. He'd watched Thomas nearly disappear into grief, watched him bring that spoon week after week, holding on to a memory so tight he forgot to live. Then he'd watched Claire walk through that door, soaking wet, desperate, and he'd watched Thomas choose to see her. Murphy had spent 50 years running a diner, watching people. He'd seen lots of kindness, but that night he'd seen something rarer. He'd seen someone choose to live again. The young couple who bought the diner wanted to rename it. Something modern, something trendy. Murphy asked them to keep the name. Just Murphy's Diner. Simple, classic. They agreed. And booth 7 would always be available, for the family that was broken and then rebuilt. For the man who learned that loving again wasn't betraying the past, it was honoring it. Murphy thought about his own late wife sometimes, about how she'd want him to keep living, keep laughing, keep making pie. Maybe he'd try dating. That nice widow from church had been asking. Maybe love was always worth trying for, even the second time around. Judge Reeves retired 2 years after Claire's case. 35 years on the bench was enough. But that case haunted her in the best way, made her proud of what judges could do when they actually paid attention, when they saw past money and lawyers and charming smiles to the truth underneath. She'd followed up on Marcus Jennings, made sure the investigation stuck, made sure his connections couldn't save him, made sure men like him understood that money couldn't buy everything. Her last act as judge was writing a letter to the Ohio Judicial Review Board, detailing every judge who'd mishandled Claire's previous custody hearings. 3 judges ended up sanctioned. 1 resigned. The system was still broken, but maybe slightly less broken than before. She attended Thomas and Claire's wedding, brought a nice gift, cried during the vows. In retirement, she volunteered with domestic violence organizations, trained new judges on recognizing manipulation and coercion in custody cases. She gave speeches titled, "How I Almost Got It Wrong," about how close she'd come to just accepting Marcus's paperwork, about how one teacher's testimony changed her mind. "Listen to the kids," she told new judges. "Listen to the people who've actually spent time with the family. Listen to your gut, and never, ever assume that money equals truth." She received awards, recognition, but her proudest moment was running into Claire at the grocery store, seeing her happy and healthy and free. "Thank you," Claire had said, "for listening. Thank you for speaking," Judge Reeves replied. That's what justice looked like, she thought. Not perfect, not easy, but real. David Chen took on 3 more cases like Claire's in the next year, won all 3, got a reputation as the lawyer who fought for the underdog. His practice thrived. He hired 2 more lawyers, opened a non-profit specifically for domestic violence custody cases. He named it Sarah's Project, with Thomas's permission, because Sarah had started the chain of kindness that led to all of this. David thought a lot about that night he'd gotten the call from his wife, about how close he'd come to saying no, he was too tired, call someone else. But he'd remembered Sarah Barrett, the nurse who'd sat with his daughter for 6 hours when she had pneumonia, even though her shift ended, who'd made them feel less scared. So he'd said yes, and that yes had changed 4 lives, maybe 5, counting his own. He wasn't just a public defender grinding through cases anymore. He had purpose, direction. He was making real change. His daughter, now 8, asked him once why he worked so many hours. Because some people need help, he'd said, and I can help them. Like you helped Oliver's mom? Exactly like that. She'd thought about it. Then, when I grow up, I want to help people too. David had hugged her, thinking about chain reactions, about kindness multiplying, about how one nurse's compassion could ripple forward in ways she'd never see. But he saw it. Every day, in every case he won, every family he kept together, every child he kept safe. Sarah Barrett had died on a winter road, but her love kept saving people anyway. Cedar Falls, Ohio, population 8,742, had seen its share of stories, births, deaths, scandals, celebrations. But the story of Thomas Barrett and Claire Mitchell became the one people told most often. At the bakery where Claire worked, customers would come in just to say they'd heard her story, to tell her they were proud of her, to buy extra muffins because they wanted to support her. At the high school where Thomas taught, students whispered about how Mr. Barrett had fought a rich guy in court, how he'd helped save a kid from an abusive dad, how he was like actually a hero. Thomas hated the attention, but it made his students see him differently, see that standing up to broken systems mattered. That one person could make a difference. The diner became a local landmark. Tour guides, Cedar Falls had one tour guide, pointed it out. That's where the Barrett family met, where one act of kindness changed everything. People started volunteering more, at shelters, at food banks, at schools. Because if Thomas Barrett could pull out a chair for a stranger, maybe they could too. The town wasn't perfect, still had gossips, still had small-minded people, still had problems, but it was slightly better, slightly kinder, because stories matter. And Cedar Falls had a story about second chances, about seeing people others walked past, about love growing in unexpected places. It was a story worth telling, and more importantly, worth living. On a Friday evening, 2 years after that rainy night, Thomas stood at Murphy's Diner with his family, booth 7, 2 spoons on the table, his and Sarah's. Emma was reading a book to Oliver. Claire was stealing fries from his plate, grinning when he mock-complained. Murphy was making pie in the back, his replacement helping. Thomas looked at Sarah's spoon. Polished. Perfect. Always there. Thank you, he said quietly. To Sarah. To the universe. To whatever force had brought Claire to that door. Claire squeezed his hand under the table. She understood. Emma looked up from her book. Daddy, can we get chocolate chip pancakes? Again? We had them last week. But they're the best. They are the best, Oliver agreed. Thomas laughed. Okay, pancakes it is. Murphy brought them out without being asked. Because some things were tradition. They ate together, laughing, arguing about whether dinosaurs were cooler than unicorns. Oliver said dinosaurs. Emma said unicorns. Thomas stayed neutral. Claire voted for dragons. And Thomas Barrett, who'd thought his life ended on a winter road 2 years ago, realized something. Life didn't end. It changed, transformed, made room for new chapters while honoring old ones. Sarah would never be replaced, but she'd made Thomas into someone who could love again, who could open his home, who could pull out a chair. And that love had multiplied, grown, become something bigger than grief. Outside, the sun set over Cedar Falls, painting the sky gold and pink. Inside booth 7, a family that shouldn't have existed, built from broken pieces and second chances, ate pancakes and laughed. 2 spoons sat on the table, one for the past, one for the present, both honored, both loved, both necessary, because the best way to remember the dead isn't to stop living. It's to live so well they'd be proud. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Sarah Barrett smiled. Her husband had finally learned what she'd always known, that broken things can be beautiful, that love is infinite, and that the people everyone else walks past are usually the ones most worth seeing. Thomas had pulled out the chair, and it had changed everything.